Hey guys, it's Maria, and today we'll be doing a deep dive into one of the patterns I made for the 50 pattern challenge. This will be a space theme pattern with rockets and astronauts, and I added a bunch of cats in there that I like to call catstronauts because it just kept me going throughout the process. But in this one, I wanted to show everything. So in terms of what resources I'm using, how I'm choosing inspiration. So you see I have Pinterest on the side. And one thing I've been doing lately, so I just like to keep Pinterest on the side now. I used to spend a lot of time trying to find the right references and saving them, and then I'll put them on my canvas and draw alongside them. And I realized it just became really limiting because with a lot of these patterns in the pattern challenge, since there isn't a lot of time to focus on each one, that was just hindering my workflow. So instead of that, because I do have a prompt going into it, I just like to keep Pinterest on the side. Currently I'm drawing in Procreate, and I just keep looking at things. Like I keep searching all the terms, and whatever sparks whatever inspires me or I think could be an interesting addition to the pattern, I just draw it. Like I try not to overthink it, and I think that's one of the things that I've always struggled with when it comes to illustrations. And with this one, it's so I'm using the 6B pencil, which by the way is my favorite. It really is my go-to when it comes to drawing digitally in Procreate. And so I'm just using the 6B pencil, and I'm just making all of these. And any idea that, like, I keep browsing through everyone's work on Pinterest, and with the value I've found from this also is because all of these sketches are not final drawings, right? These are the very initial sketches in my process, and I don't even know if I'm going to use all of them. Some of them I don't end up using. And even though I am looking at other people's artwork for it, because after this I will not be going back to those references, then there's very little chance of me copying what that person's done, right? Like right now I'm just looking at the poses, and I'm just treating it as like a reference picture for styles and gestures that my illustrations would have. And this is something that's trickier to do when you're a very beginner at drawing, because in some of these I'm using like a face from someplace and posture from somewhere else, and I'm even editing the figures posture, and that only comes with like a lot of drawing practice. But it is a good way of, at least for me, it's become a really good way of approaching my process. So here we're just drawing the motifs that will be going into the pattern, and it's really liberating to just switch my mind off for the most part, not entirely, and just draw and have no expectations for what the final would look like, and just let the process guide me. So if you are also working with a prompt, or you have a concept or some kind of theme that you're basing it on, so it's always good to make a mind map, ideally on paper, or like on your tablet or wherever you're drawing, or like make a mental mind map of all the possible things that could go into this theme, so that everything feels cohesive, like everything feels like it fits into the story of your pattern or illustration or your concept. And even though like cats were not part of the prompt itself, I felt like it could add like a cute element and a little bit of whimsical touch to the whole pattern, which is always fun to have. I mean, yeah, so when choosing your motifs, and now we're going to start narrowing them down, and we're going towards the composition end of things. Just be sure of whether or not it fits into the concept, or if you have a concept for your illustration or your pattern, do you think it fits into what you're trying to communicate? Because that can really help with the mood you're building, and maybe it even helps you decide what color scheme you want to choose. So to catch you up with what I've done so far, I have picked my motifs, I've drawn them out roughly. Since all of them were on 1 or 2 layers, I used the selection tool and then put every sketch on its own layer, and here I'm just trying to make a repeat pattern tile. An easy way of going about it is just make sure the things on top are repeating on the bottom, the things on the side are repeating on both sides. I hope that makes sense. But now I'm just composing it. So this part took a lot of time, and it's good to take your time with it because you want to make sure your composition's balanced. It's has the same look and feel that you wanted to go for, that the vibes are immaculate. But the harder part was to figure out where to put the cats and the astronaut, and how many to put in there, and because like all of these decisions are entirely up to you and what you're trying to do. So one thing I would recommend is repeat some motifs and have some repetition in there. Try to play around with like how big or small things are, so scale, and don't be afraid to move things around a lot. And if you're confused between where to place things, then you can make multiple versions of compositions and then either export them or just screenshot your canvas and see, then flip through them in your photo gallery and see whether or not it is something, which one speaks to you more. If you're getting really confused and you just don't know which one to pick, so it's always a good idea to take some time off, get some time away from the canvas, take a step back, and then come back to it later. You'll have more clarity on what you want out of this. But so here we're testing out the composition. I'm testing out the pattern, whether or not I like it, whether or not it works as a repeat pattern. And based off of the stuff that I exported, I knew what changes I wanted to make, and the lime green, light green patterns just helping me figure out whether or not I'm making any mistakes when I'm scaling it. So now we are on to my favorite part of the process, which is color. So I am using a color palette made by Charlie Clements, and I'm just gonna link it down in the description below, and it's called Tutti Frutti, and it worked really well for the mood that I wanted, the kind of feel I wanted for this pattern. So something bright and fun and a little whimsical, but still feeling like a space pattern. And it wasn't my first choice. Like, I had a lot of color schemes that I did go through, and then eventually I settled on it because it was a pre-made color scheme, and sometimes that just makes things easier. And if you guys want, I can make a separate video about all the places you can get color inspiration from for your projects, be it graphic design or illustration. But it helps to follow all of these creators online who do provide these resources. And yeah, so back to the illustration. It again was a process of trial and error. Since Procreate does have some limitations, either layer limit or just it's really difficult to scale things or trying to make things editable, so it's better, at least I prefer, to put everything on a separate layer. That's why you'll see me constantly going back to my to another file with the drawings on, because after I'm done with the initial drawing phase of the motifs, I like to duplicate the file and then do the color on a separate file. That way it opens up way more layers for me to work on, and I can just make things easier, faster, more efficient for myself. And when you have more layers, then you can easily just put everything on a separate layer, and I like to group them and keep them organized. I should name all of them, but I've only named the most important groups for me in this process. And yeah, so here I'm just making the repeat elements on the top and sides, and I should have colored it in before transferring it to this document, but it's okay, it's all part of the learning process. Here is a very good example of when you don't have a reference and you get really confused. So then I opened up Pinterest to remember what the earth looks like, and yeah, I'm just trying to add the repeat elements first, and then I'm just gonna go through the rest of it. So one of the challenges I did have while coloring, it's because I'm dealing with such bright colors, it's very easy to make it overwhelming. So for everything that I did end up coloring, I had to find different color variations for each thing. Some things I deliberately muted down, and because I was going for a flat color look, I tried to find ways of adding depth without it being so in your face. So this planet is a good example of that, because I just added some yellow just to add some dimension, but it'll be barely there. It'll add more dimension without it being too obvious. So another way I work through this is, because I had a set color palette, so I divided where all of these bright colors will go. So the astronauts, I kept a more muted color, and then first I filled in all the bright colors in different places, and making sure too much of the same color is not in one place. So you'll see I've divided, like the Earth's blue just stays there, and then in order for the rocket in front of it to pop and to be more noticeable, I placed it in front of it. And it helps to know a little bit of color theory, but if you're not familiar with it, essentially if it's a contrasting color or a complementary color, then it'll just help it stand out more against its complementary color. So with blue and orange, and even blue and yellow, and yeah. So another thing that you can use is like keeping a very saturated, very bright color, and then the other one like behind it. Like for example with this moon, what I did was I kept it very muted and made it similar to, like, made it super dark. What that did is like push it more towards the background. That way anything I put on top of it will feel like it's more in front of you and will be more in focus. So it's all a process of trial and error. It gets easier with practice, and you keep changing things up as you see it. So there were a lot of changes I made along the way, especially after the pattern testing, which we will get to in a bit. So the rest of it is just me experimenting with the colors, trying to fit it in. It feels very tedious, especially if you're watching, but it's very satisfying, and it's like an itch you need to scratch to get the right colors. But yeah, so it's this constant battle of finding some kind of balance in your composition. And you will see that even though the composition phase was technically done, you should always be open to like making changes for whatever works, because after the color comes in, then it does change a lot of like ways of how things will interact with each other. So you will see that I've added more stars, or I'm going to move some spaceships around. And don't just settle for the first thing that you do. It's good to experiment with more things, even if you end up going back to the first thing you did. Trying a few things will always help you pick the best solution for your drawing. And here I'm just coloring in the asteroids. And so if you were to add shadows to this illustration, which I wanted to keep it flat, so I didn't, I would recommend, especially with this kind of workflow, to just color in everything first and then make a new layer on top of all of it, and go on the multiply blending mode and find any color, make it slightly dark, and because of the multiply layer, it will automatically be darker than the colors you're painting it on. And that could be your shadows layer. It will save you more time, unless there are other ways of going about it, but I would prefer to do that. And so you see the dome for the spaceships for this, and the what do you call it, the space helmets for the astronauts, the astronauts. So in order to make it look like glass, I've just decreased the opacity until it showed enough of the illustration within. So I made sure the layer for that glass was on top. Anyways, we are now moving on to our pattern testing phase. So here I'm using a resource by Maya Faber. She is also a creator of resources and surface pattern designer, and I've linked it down below. It's on her website. And so I've wanted to make some changes. Here I've made the planets darker in case it made the pattern look better, or the spacing and the colors, like I felt like maybe it was getting too overwhelming. So then I did try moving things around. And the thing is, right now I haven't finished the entire pattern, right? Like there's still things that need to be done, and I just wanted to make sure I had an idea of what direction I should go in before I ended up completing the entire illustration. So I would also recommend, if you are making patterns, then you do keep testing the pattern out during your process, at least once when you've made the initial composition with just the drawings, and then again when you have most of your colors down, like just the flat colors in the backgrounds, before you go into making the details. But now that we have done the testing, it's time to move on to the details, and you can really have fun with this. You can use any brush you want. It's good to try out all the existing brushes, or if you find any other brushes online that you would be interested in. Like, it's always good to like keep trying things out. At the beginning of every project, I do you know, like swatch some brushes and see what I would like for this. So this like just adding a little bit of texture through your brushes really helps. I'm also adding a little bit of reflection onto the gloss so that feels like gloss. And these little details, like it's good to spend your time with them because they can really take your work to the next level. And maybe you can add a little bit of shadow, a little bit of like having a slight line. Like you don't have to outline everything, right? Having a slight line for the ears. And one thing, especially when you're like working with super colorful stuff, and this is a personal preference, like I prefer not to use complete black when it comes to details. And since here like the background is black, so it's just better for me to use a brighter color or like a shade, like the darkest version of a color instead of using a complete black. And yeah, so this phase is just so much fun. I think it's my second favorite phase after the coloring. And you can really refine everything and have it give the exact feel that you wanted, the right vibes, if you will. And yeah, I hope you enjoy this because now we are moving on to our final pattern. So here, since it is a repeat pattern, I can just duplicate and then check if everything's aligning. And you don't have to do all of these steps, but I like to have the pattern exported in various sizes. And here I noticed that I'd forgotten the little satellite, so I went back in to my previous file again. I did duplicate like this file, flatten all of the motifs, and then I exported the like created the repeat pattern tile. And yeah, so this is the final pattern. We're here. We did it. And here's some mock-ups to show you what it'll look like on products. And I won't lie, I'm quite proud of it. I had a lot of fun making it, and I think that's what's important. And I hope you enjoyed this as well. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next Sunday.